coming out here. We're here for Coming Home, Dialogues on the Moral, Psychological, and Spiritual Impacts of War. This is a collaborative event and part of a larger collaborative grant that Jesse's going to speak about. My name is Daniel Rothenberg. I'm a professor at Arizona State University, and I co-direct something called the Center on the Future of War that is a partnership between our school, ASU, and where we are now, New America. And some of you know something about this. For example, David Wood was a fellow at ASU, Future of War fellow at New America with us for 2 years. And then other folks here are familiar. Tony, other people have worked on projects. But what's interesting about this linkage, and we're very proud of it, is that it's an experiment to connect a major public research university, ASU, which is kind of prides itself on innovation and trying new things and trying to sort of craft the future of higher education in a lot of ways. And then New America, a similarly nimble think tank. And I think it's probably fair to say that there are not that many situations where these kinds of institutions not only have somebody go and sit in an office and work on a research project and share a grant, that's very common, but actually construct a structurally integrated relationship which involves, the movement of real resources, money and people, both directions. And we're very excited about that. The experiment's going quite nicely, we think. We've created an online master's degree program in this way. We have a sort of flagship, and you're all invited to this conference every year called the Future Security Forum. It will be April 28th, 2020. We do we have some big research initiatives, one on proxy war, and a lot of other things happening. We have done a few moral injury initiatives, such as this one. But I'm just saying all this because part of what's allowing us all to sit here is a partnership, and the vision of the partnership isn't really just restricted to ASU and New America, proof being some of you and this institutional link. It's just something that's a broader idea that we should try to break through institutional structural divisions such as those that push policy, that develop policy ideas in DC, and universities that often seem distant from that world. Similarly, we try to pull together and bridge linkages between civilian and military worlds. In any case, we're thrilled that you're all here. Thanks so much. I'm supposed to, there has been some technical difficulties, so we apologize for the audio. There were building-wide network changes made over the weekend that have affected our audio. We thought that was fixed. I'm not sure you're hearing that, right? And I believe that our live stream should have fine sound and that all the lavalier mics and these mics and the mics for questions are all working fine. That said, there are some audio issues, and just it should work fine, and we're thrilled again that you've come to join us.
Great, thank you, Daniel, and thank you all for being here. A big thanks to the speakers, to those that helped make this event happen, the staff. We're really excited. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the Coming Home project, and I know that we're already, I think we're running on academic time here, which means that we're about 10 minutes late, so I'm going to be very brief. With that being said, I'll tell you a little bit about the Coming Home project, and then the run a show for today. So the Coming Home Dialogues is a project that's supported by the National Endowment for Humanities. It's been co-directed by myself, Jesse Kirkpatrick, from George Mason University's Institute for Philosophy and Public Policy, with Ed Barrett from the U.S. Naval Academy, and in partnership with Daniel Rothenberg. And so the real goal of this project is very simple. It's to engage veterans, military veterans, in dialogues on their experiences in war using the humanities as a point of departure. So we've conducted a series of these dialogues over the course of 3 years at all of the major service academies in the U.S. And so we have engaged numerous sailors, soldiers, airmen and women, and Marines. So this is the capstone of the project, which is why you're here today. So we have 2 amazing panels and a keynote. The first panel is on the topic of torture and moral injury. The keynote, which will be by David Wood, is on moral injury when two worlds collide. And the third is moral injury in combat, the personal, policy, and philosophical reflections. So I'm the only thing now keeping you all between myself and an excellent panel. So I'm going to invite our first panel to come up and allow them to introduce themselves with the moderator. So thank you very much.
morning. I'm David Luban. I am a professor of law and philosophy at Georgetown University, and I also have the chair in ethics at the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership at the United States Naval Academy. I'm very glad to see you here. The issue of torture is something that's been back in the headlines this fall. Many of you may have seen the new film, The Report, with Adam Driver playing one of the staffers on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. It's about the making of the torture report. Last week, the newspapers published a series of extremely disturbing drawings that were done by Abu Zubaydah, who was the first man tortured in the CIA's rendition, detention, interrogation program. And these were drawings by Abu Zubaydah depicting the ways in which he was tortured, and they're disturbing and horrific. Now, we've had something called the torture debate in America for many years now, for 15 years, and it's really a mix of several different debates. One of them is moral. Is torture ever permissible, if it saves lives, for example, or not? And a second is legal. Is torture, or is the things that we do legally torture, and is torture against the law? Should it be against the law? A third, which I think is a slightly more debased one, is does torture work? But there's a fourth one, and that is, what does torture do to the people who are involved in it? The Office of Medical Services of the CIA issued a report last year that I think the report's actually older, but it came from a FOIA request that was only honored last year, in which something's mentioned about the interrogation of Abu Zubaydah, and that is that all of the onlookers and participants found it so disturbing what was done to him that a request went back to the Office of Technical Services of CIA, could you please send us some therapists so that the people who are involved in the interrogations can cope with them, with what they're seeing and what they're doing. Now, that brings us to our topic for today, which is about the fourth torture debate. What does torture do to the characters of the people who see it, participate in it, or collude with it, or think that they're colluding with it? And so I guess the official definition of moral injury is a kind of mental harm that's caused by fearful things that one has done oneself, or failed to prevent, or just witness things that break your moral code. And it's different from the kind of post-traumatic stress disorder that comes from having had the fearful thing done to you. And Abu Zubaydah and some of the other Guantanamo detainees have been severely traumatized and continue to suffer from PTSD from what was done to them in 2002. But we're talking about something different, which is the kind of damage to the character of the perpetrators, or people who have witnessed it, or people who have failed to prevent it. Now, thankfully, we have come a long way from 1943, when General Patton famously slapped a combat-stressed soldier and called him a goddamn whimpering coward. And now we have come to understand that more compassion is needed. I mean, at the time, General Eisenhower made Patton apologize to the soldier. And one of the first steps was realizing that psychological help for disturbing symptoms and syndromes like PTSD is important. But one of the insights about moral injury is that there is a moral component as well, and that we need to address these disturbances to the characters of our warriors, not only through therapy, although therapy is important for those who need it, but also through moral processes of working out the implications of what they've done and, when necessary, atoning for it. Now, in today's panel, we have three tremendous speakers, and I'd like to introduce them before I turn it over. First is Lieutenant Colonel Bill Edmonds, who wrote a searing book called God Is Not Here, subtitled A Soldier's Struggle with Torture, Trauma, and the Moral Injuries of War, a book published in 2015. Bill is a former Special Forces officer in Mosul. And he's still on active duty, currently stationed in Tübingen, Germany. And one of the things that he writes about is assisting and witnessing an interrogator, a Kurdish interrogator, who used vicious methods, and what it did to him and the way in which he came to cope with it. Second is Ian Fishback, a retired Army major from the 82nd Airborne, who in 2005, witnessing troops torturing. I'll just read what he wrote: death threats, beatings, broken bones, exposure to elements, extreme forced exertion, stripping, sleep deprivation, and degrading treatment. After fruitlessly going up the chain of command, wrote a letter, an open letter to Senator John McCain, in which he said, "This is a tragedy. I can remember as a cadet at West Point resolving to ensure that my men would never commit a dishonorable act, that I would protect them from that type of burden. It absolutely breaks my heart that I have failed some of them in this regard." Ian is currently completing a PhD in philosophy at the University of Michigan, and he tells me that he's writing about rule of law aspects of the counterterrorism operations. And our third speaker is Dr. Kate McGraw, who is the Deputy Division Chief of the Psychological Health Center of Excellence in the Defense Health Agency. She is currently part of DOD's Sexual Assault Advisory Group to the Psychological Health and Readiness Council, and also a member of the U.S. Peace Corps Sexual Assault Advisory Council. She started as an Air Force ICBM launch officer. She served as an aerospace psychologist for the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program and flight commander of mental health. And she was the chief of the deployed team that provided operational mental health support for the DoD Port Mortuary during 9/11 and also at the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my speakers to come, whether you want to stay there or come to the podium, it's your choice, but Bill Edmonds is up first.
Hi, I'm Bill. Dave already talked about my experiences, so I don't want to talk about the experiences. I think what's important is that we become wise not only by creating new knowledge, but by remembering things that we've always known, but then we have forgotten over and over again. One of those wisdoms that have been unlearned, is really that, war may be necessary, but it's always a choice, and it's never moral. And as a warring nation, I think it's a sacred obligation that we take what has become unseen, and then we make it into more explicit. We peel away the layers of euphemisms, essentially. And war is organized killing. And when we ask young moral Americans to participate in war, we're giving them the responsibility to try to bring goodness out of these impossibly bad situations. It's helped me to see war kind of like a moral minefield, and where every step, literally every choice can sometimes feel like dying a little death. And we put young men and women into the center of this minefield, and we ask them to often just wander blindfolded. And some of them don't get to come home, and those who do often carry that war within them. And when they do arrive home, too often and I'll take a line from Dr. Wood here. Too often we tell them to suffer alone and in silence, and too often that suffering can last an entire lifetime. So, how do we respond? If you haven't already noticed on the topics of the moral, psychological, and spiritual impacts of war, there's diverse opinions and many different perspectives. But I would truly believe that rather than a weakness, this is a strength that is actually essential. The late anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss captured this phenomenon, I think, perfectly when, after a lifetime of searching for the one true version of a myth, he realized that the greater sum could be found in the sum of all the different versions. And the same could be said for the truth about those, invisible wounds of war that are just less visibly apparent. These invisible wounds, they're relative truths, and they're impacted or they're inflicted by the subjective. And some of the people that have helped me to at least frame and understand my experiences have helped me to put those experiences into words. Charles Darwin said a long time ago that of all the differences between man and the lower animals, that the moral sense or conscious is by far the most important. Michael Tomasello, who's a behavioral scientist, I think at the Max Planck Institute, said that morality defines us as a species. Steven Pinker, a experimental psychologist, said that morality conveys to us the meaning of life. Now, morality is a double-edged sword, and they've captured one side. Gita Sereni captures, I think, the other edge. She's a late British historian who spent her entire life trying to understand the nature of evil and its converse, human goodness. And after a lifetime of searching, she realized that when you remove morality, you can extinguish the human being. I would absolutely agree with her words and all of those words, but I would put them in a different. I would use different words. Morality is perhaps our single greatest organizing principle. Once we come into this world, and over the course of a lifetime, we meticulously construct, a set of codes, values, and ideals that govern nearly every aspect of our lives. And from morality, from these strongly held beliefs, we derive a sense of well-being when those beliefs are adhered to by the world, by other people, and by ourselves. But at the same time, though we'll all differ in perspectives, and we come to morality with sometimes conflicting, if not diverse perspectives. I think there's one thing that we can all agree about morality. It's that morality is an immensely powerful source of meaning for the men and women in our military. We select for it. Men and women, almost universally self-select for morality when they raise their hand and volunteer for service. And then from day one, assuming that that there's an innate and nurtured morality, we still inculcate that source of meaning into them from day one, and for every day to come. We teach them that there is a right and wrong. We teach them that there is a good and bad, and that when our nation chooses to go to war, then by definition that war is declared moral. But no matter how moral the service member, no matter how moral their choices, no matter how necessary the war, there will always be a moment when the world or other people or yourself violate or transgress or sometimes utterly extinguish these very important beliefs that we've come to depend on for a sense of well-being. The life and lonely death of I believe, David, you talked about him, the life and lonely death of Noah. He's a young soldier who in Iraq ran over an Iraqi child with his Bradley fighting vehicle. Several years later, he ended his suicide letter with a silent scream, essentially. He said, "I am a bad person, and now I'm free." Okay? When we experience some morally traumatic event, that the meaning that we've come to depend on for well-being can be stolen. And in that place where we once held meaning, there becomes nothingness. And into that, it's like a vacuum. We instinctively claw and search for some new source of meaning. And meaning doesn't have to come from the positive. In fact, negative meaning is immensely powerful source, especially when something like morality is taken away, something that has been lost and you're grieving. Okay? You need to find blame. You need to judge. You need to assign responsibility for something that wasn't supposed to be possible. And so, two forms of meaning, organizing principles come in to that space where morality once existed. I rage. I rage at the world and everything in it. I rage perhaps at existence or God or institutions I've come to the trust or other people. But also I turn that rage inward. Rage turned inward is shame. Rage and shame are like quasi-entities. And they're utterly exhausting to live with. And in time, these entities can convince a person that not living can somehow seem preferable. So, but there is change, and it is actually quite easy. If for those who suffer from the moral, spiritual, and psychological impacts of war, one thing that we can do, and I think is important, is that we engage them in some activity that requires the focusing of their attention. Okay? That's essential. And in that space where they follow that pursuit, any pursuit, as long as it's something that engages them and focuses their attention, that has to be taken place in a space that is both safe and compassionate, a space where judgment cannot literally exist. And maybe, just maybe, they will break their silence. I like to think of this space as actually a place where service members and veterans can escape the prisons that they've entrapped themselves in and they've been living and unrealizing it. The prison is past and future, and they can actually return to the present moment. And in that present moment, we can help them to practice an immensely powerful new way of living. Okay? Memories, despite what everyone's told us, memories never just fade away. When we ignore memories, especially most painful memories, those memories can come alive and seep and reach through time with searching and grasping claws. And memories that you actually resist or persist or deny, you actually strengthen. And those memories can consume. But in those safe spaces, we can teach them that the memories that they can hold without judgment, they can process. And the memories that they can process, you can transform. And the memories that you can transform cannot haunt you. Okay? And honestly, I think that should be our new clarion call.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.